Hello, good afternoon. Hello, can you hear me in the back? Yes, fine, jolly good. Thank you for coming back today. Lovely day outside. Shame to be in the dark, isn't it? For a while. Right, Silk Road. We have a lot to look at today in this wonderful journey which we've been travelling along. So we looked at yesterday the central regions and going to Xi'an, which is over here. Just to remind you, Dunhuang, the Mogao grottos are here, right, just at the point where the routes, the main routes, split south and north around the Taklamakan deserts. And as you can see, there are two routes that go around circumventing the Tian Shan mountains to the north. So you've got all sorts of mountains, Karakoram mountains, the Kunlun mountains, and the desert regions, inhospitable place. So Kashgar is here at the other end, Turfan's in the middle. So this is the main region we were looking at. We're going to go a bit further over here. There's Sogdiana. Remember the possible Sogdian with the nice beard yesterday? That was their area here. They were the purveyors of very good merchants and organisation in the sort of 7th to 9th centuries. So we looked at those kind of regions yesterday. So where did they stay and where was the water supply? These are the Flame Mountains in the desert area. Very arid, inhospitable, as you can see from these photographs. I photographed this wonderful building in around 2002. I very much doubt whether it's still there, but I keep it in the lecture because it is a wonderful sort of iconic, ancient-looking building that looks like it's going to crumble at any moment. Canals here, as you can see around the Toyuk village and basin, and underground canals. It was called, these are around Turfan on the eastern side of that double route. And Kares was the water system that was an underground irrigation system that fed through many places. And they dug down, and they would dig down into the wells and access the aquifers, of which there are many in this seemingly remote desert region, which is where, of course, the oases come from. So it's a very ancient system of underground water supply in and around Turfan, and in fact is still, as you can see, being used today. And you can see from this how clear the water is. It's pure water right from underground. Wonderful stuff. Very clean, and they don't pollute it with detergents or plastic, so that's good to see. There's no plastic bags kind of hanging around down there. They keep it clean for good reason. There are around about at least 5,000 kilometers of this underground water system networking in the region, and probably further afield as well, because in the ancient days there were more rivers that were flowing in the ancient days. They've been depleted horribly, especially in the last 100 years, which we'll talk about and address tomorrow with the current circumstances. So water systems were there if you knew where to access them with the oases, Kares system. Where did they stay? Well, they stayed in the caravanserai. This is in the Anatolian region, central region. This one is called the Sultan Han. Han is a word that means inn for travellers, not to be confused with Han Chinese, which are the ethnic Chinese, dating from the Han dynasty. So different Han, all right, different word, just the same sound. So the Seljuks were the Turkic tribes that actually were very good at administrating and organising the trade in the 11th to 13th centuries. We had the Sogdians before them further east, 7th to 9th centuries, and the Seljuks were a very organised race who were good at administrating the merchant side of things and travelling. So this is one of the largest, the Sultan Han, 1229 CE, Christian era. Just on that bottom right here, there's a chap with his car. Can you see him? So that gives the scale of this building. It's enormous. It's really big. Built in the 13th century, but it is a very impressive building, one of the best. And we can't go in them, unfortunately. Some of them you can these days. But inside you can see, just in the top part of the construction, there are a series of inner courtyards, and there would be secure areas that would be built to house people. This is the inside of this one. Didn't go in it, but these are the photographs. And this is very much a feature of Seljuk stone masonry and stone decoration. It's rather nice, it's rather pretty. So they did put this around the outside of the main front gate. And inside, as you can see, it's a series of high corridors and arches, a bit like a basilica in style, that take you through into different chambers. So they were large places. This is another one, Sari Han, the crown door, which is the main door here, the main gate inside it, with inner courtyards. And this one has a separate courtyard here, separate building. Now, the courtyards were used for the animals, of course, and the secure places for the people staying overnight. And many of them, in fact, had their own prayer rooms and even a small mosque inside the whole complex, so that people could also worship as they wanted when they were staying in the caravanserai. So they are very interesting places. We were taken to one. This is in central Anatolia, sort of central eastern Turkey, the Orasin Han caravanserai. This is south from Aksaray, and we went in this one. As you can see, it's a lot smaller. It's not nearly as grand. Some of them were simple, small and simple lodgings. Others were very grand and almost like palatial lodgings. So Sultan Han was obviously one of those. So here we are inside this one, the Orasin Han. And again, it has the features of a kind of basilica with these huge arches and domes, with sometimes lights coming down, and different chambers going off the main corridors, if you like, with these kind of areas, seating areas with low tables, lots of cushions, very comfortable, so that the travellers could relax and talk and exchange news and stories while they were staying at these places. Now, the main thing that, of course, they were secure, because, of course, these caravans were travelling with goods, and as we've seen from yesterday, some of the goods were worth a lot of money, very wealthy. So they needed secure places to stay, places where they could know that their wares that they were traveling with were secure overnight. And of course the animals as well, the horses and the camels had to be secure too and well fed. So all this was taken care of, and it was very good. And there's another interesting bit about this I'll say in a moment. So as these centuries, Seljuks were around 11th to 13th century, which is when you had the advent of the Islamic religion coming through these areas from the 8th, 9th, 10th centuries. So Buddhism in the far eastern side of all this died off in a sense, or was overtaken, and the places that we looked at yesterday were really kind of abandoned by pretty much the 10th century. So Islam kind of took over, and of course each wave of peoples that came through had different effects on different parts of these routes, which is why I was saying they weren't always the same routes. They were like tributaries. They came and they went depending on the political circumstance, the social circumstance, or even physical floods, rock falls, earthquakes, and all of those. So the routes would change. There were the main routes, but then there was lots of other networks that would come and go. So the main upshot in this central region was, of course, that Islam came through and overlaid things, and two of the main towns, the main cities in the sort of around about 12th, 13th century was Kayseri on the left, and Nevşehir Mosque, very nice mosque there on the right. And you can see quite nice decoration here, Seljuk type decoration on this kind of monument. So these were the things that were beginning to be seen during this particular period. The Anatolian highway is still pretty bleak, going through the pass into the Taurus Mountains and up the gorges. Now this is an interesting place. This is in the Seljuk era, 1220s, 1250s. The Seljuks were very good at building. They built upon other things. This was an earlier, much earlier Roman bridge, and they built it up and used it. A bridge over the Eurymedon River. And you can see here from the aerial view what this bridge is like. So it's got a sort of stopping section in the middle. Now, they would have a system of tolls and taxes throughout all the regions. So if you wanted to cross a bridge, you would have to pay a toll and a tax. You might pay it at the beginning, or you might even pay it halfway there at the stopping point in the middle, which seems a natural stopping point. You would also be stopping the sort of trade on the river here. This was a very, very active area in the time. In the early centuries, in fact, around this area was called Pamphylia and has Roman settlements, very, very important Roman settlements at Aspendos around 2nd century AD, CE, Christian era. So this was all very exciting. So the Seljuks were very good. They rebuilt the bridge and used it. These are some of the coins, Roman coins that were excavated at Aspendos site, which is in this area. And there was a huge aqueduct, which the Seljuks also replenished and helped to rebuild and use, big aqueduct, and also this wonderful amphitheatre, which is one of the most complete amphitheatres which one can see really still in existence and in fact still being used. So this was a whole Roman settlement area, an important one, Pamphylia, 2nd century. And this is the outside of the main structure. That's the inside of the main structure here. And the Seljuks rebuilt it and kept it good and firm. And this was also a place where people would stay as a caravanserai. So they would stay in the secure part up here, and the animals would be here in the open amphitheatre, and they could then sit outside in the evenings or go inside. It was a very useful place. Now, interesting about the taxes and tolls which they implemented. People pay taxes all the time, just like we do. When we travel, we need passports, we need pass papers, and we have to pay airport taxes, do we not? So it was very similar in those days. But the interesting thing was that the Seljuks instituted the system that you could have the first 3 nights of your stay in a caravanserai were free because you've been paying your taxes. After that, you had to pay. So you had the first 3 nights gratis anywhere in any of the caravanserai that they operated, all right, not in the other regions. So that was a good system. So if you wanted to cross rivers or cross a border or cross into another state, a neighbouring state, you had to pay some sort of toll or tax, and you had to show your papers. Remember, I showed you the walled city in China, so you'd have to wait outside, take your papers, tell them your business and what you were doing before you were allowed in to the city. So it was all very controlled, but it worked. And the merchants, the merchant class in this time, sort of 12th, 13th century, were very good, very prosperous, made a lot of money, and they were well respected because they were good administrators. So things worked well, which is nice. So, unlike some things. So in the central Anatolian region, so Aspendos is sort of north of Alanya in central Turkey, and we're thinking Roman as well. Romans were through there. So in the central region, we have this extraordinary valley. This is a place called Goremi in central Turkey with a tufa valley. Again, a very bleak landscape, a very unusual landscape with these rock formations. You may have seen some pictures of them. 1844, a French traveller, Charles Texier, made some very nice engravings of these regions, and you can see how accurate he was in his drawings of the people and these tufa, which is like a soft lava. So the peoples here would dig into the side of the mountains and the tufas and actually dig out caves and caverns and live in them. So it's a very interesting region in itself, and it's almost like a lunar landscape. It's like another planet, quite extraordinary. So I've been there a long time, and it's to do with the erosion of the lava into these kinds of pinnacles, and they have different bands of colour sometimes as well in certain regions as they erode away down the sides because it's very windy. We experience the wind, it's huge, a bit like your southerlies that come blasting through Cape Town. So whole cities and whole communities would actually dig in here into the mountain and make caverns and caves. Now, this is an interesting region because of also the fact that they cut in churches. Now, around about the 4th century, we have Byzantium a bit later, but the 4th century there was a sort of attack against the sort of Christian religions. Christians were persecuted and needed to move, and they came to these remote regions for kind of refuge. And there's quite an interesting story about the background to this place around about the 4th century as a religious site. We have what they call the Cappadocian Fathers. Cappadocia is the name of the region. Cappadocia means place of beautiful horses. I must admit, we didn't see any horses when we were there, but that was the original meaning of the name. And original meanings are indicative. Kashi, or Kashgar, means place of blue tiles. And Urumqi, which is the capital of Xinjiang, meant beautiful, fertile pasture. Well, you wouldn't think that if you went there today. But the original meanings of place names is also worth investigating and quite interesting. So back to Cappadocia, the place of beautiful horses. Around about in the 4th century, persecution of Christians increased, and shelters and cities into these rocks and other places were made for them. There were 3 great saints that came to this region, 2 Gregories and a Basil. So St. Gregory, a theologian, was from present-day Axalé. His dates are 329 to 394 AD, 4th century. Another St. Gregory was from Nysa, which is present-day Nevşehir, one of the big towns, big cities there. And his brother, St. Basileus, St. Basil, 329 to 379, of Caesarea, is present-day Caesarea, which is also a big town in that region. Now, St. Basil the Great, as he was known, received a classical education and religious instruction in Constantinople and later in Athens, and decided to go to Caesarea, the town, to devote himself to a monastic life. This is interesting, so I'm just reading you this bit to give you a little bit of background. He promoted the establishment of monasteries in the region, creating a focus for secluded hermits that would benefit the wider community with their combined religions and religious practice and teaching. He wrote widely on theology, ecclesiastical law, doctrines, and behavior that would benefit the common good. For example, sharing food in times of famine and helping others less fortunate. So these were very Christian acts which he gave out in his practice and in his teachings. So the practice of common prayer was also used in all the churches in the region. All the churches in the region. There are a lot. Some of them are very simple, like this one, a cave church with almost like a Maltese cross, which I know if you couldn't, difficult to see, it was the same kind of cross on that possibly Nestorian saint we saw the very fine fragment of, had the same kind of cross on his pectoral and up here. So some of them were just one sort of pigment on sort of basic stone with very simple decorations. Others were much more complex. This is an interesting one, 11th century iconoclastic images. You know, iconoclasm is to break down the imagery of Christian church. They sort of went against it. They still have the Maltese cross, as you can see. We don't know what this is or represents. I know what I think it looks like, but nobody in all the books I was looking at about this region had any idea what this represents. I mean, to me it looks like a cockroach. I don't know. So, who knows? We don't know. It's a most extraordinary image on this church, this iconoclastic church. So, very intriguing. This is Achixalé Monastery, and the excavations into the side of this mountain are huge. I mean, it is very big inside, it's enormous. And this was a large monastery, teaching monastery in the manner of St. Basil and St. Gregory, the 2 Gregories, and inside some of their churches in here, we have a beautiful Last Supper at Achixalé Monastery, circa 1212 Christian era, with the fish and all the apostles around this beautiful table with the Christ in the bottom left-hand corner. we have also this, Christ, Mary and St. John on the left, and the Pantocrator dome at Karikli Church, 11th century. Pantocrator was the universal image of Christ, in the same way that the Vairocana Buddha was the universal Buddha, uniting all the different Buddhas. So the Pantocrator Christ is usually in the middle of the ceiling, very visible. He's the unifying Christ of all the others, all the sects. So very, very powerful image, and very dominant in the church, looking down upon you and the congregation. So very powerful imagery, dominant imagery. And these paintings are really quite extraordinary inside these churches in this retreat. I find this one interesting as well. This is the interior of Tokali Church, 10th century, with the upper registers here and the paintings, and of course the blue. Think of the Butis lapis lazuli blue pigment used with saints here. And I find this and the struts, don't forget this is carved into the side of a mountain, the struts indicating a wooden ceiling, which you actually don't need, of course, but they echo exactly the formation of the basilica style that was used in the interior of the cave churches at Ajanta, India, the basilica style. And look at the upper registers of the different Buddhas and the saints and things here on the upper, what you would call capitals of these columns. And in the same way here, the iconography is very reminiscent. It's like that kind of style. So it's very interesting, the references that you see in some of these churches. This is the very plain outside of Karanlik Church. Karanlik means dark. And you can see what I call a Maltese cross. There's probably another name for it up here at the top there. You go in, and this is one of the most extraordinary interiors in the whole region. It's called dark because of the dark blue indigo background for the images. And it is said that the probable artists came from Constantinople, came from Byzantium itself, and painted these in this retreat area in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the sort of central eastern Anatolian regions. And they came here to paint these really extraordinary and detailed and accomplished and sophisticated images in these simple church interiors in this region. So these are quite fantastic. There's a Last Supper down there at the bottom on the right, and of course the crucifixion, the detail of which is here, where the chap here is putting the sponge into the wound of, he's wiping the body with, was it salt or vinegar to make him sweat more? It's not to ease his pain, it's to increase the pain. I can't remember whether it looks like salt on the edge of a sponge. It might be vinegar or salt, but anyway, it's to increase the suffering, not to help him. They're interesting. And there's a transfiguration, a wonderful transfiguration. I mean, you know, it's the equivalent of the Sistine Chapel in a way, because it really is, and the whole place is like this inside this one church. It's really quite fantastic. There are other churches, the Martyrs of Sebast in Yilani, just called the Serpent Church. They have different names for different reasons, not always clear, because there are many different types of churches. But I like this one, this repeated images of the martyrs and the saints, which to my mind reminds me of the cave of the 1,000 Buddhas in the Mogao grottos, where you have the repeated images like that all over the walls. And you have the same kind of repetition of images in some of those churches far, far away in the Anatolian region. So a village in Cappadocia is here. They're not really so much inhabited now, but it's interesting to visit them. This is the entranceway on the left-hand side, and you go down. So I said, where do people go in times of war? Well, there was a lot of conflict and war in this particular region throughout the centuries. And so they hid their culture in those Tufa mountains. They hid the churches so that they were not apparent. And then they went underground. And these cave cities, and I mean cities, they are huge. The labyrinth of tunnels and chambers in these areas. I didn't scan a map of the outline which they gave you. Should have done that. It is really enormous. So they had areas to store food, they had chambers, they had corridors, they had big funnels going up to let in air, of course, into certain chambers so that you could breathe. And when they wanted to block off those corridors to stop people getting in, they would just roll this huge, like a big millstone, they would just roll it across so that you couldn't get in. So that was very effective. So thinking about all of that, the iconoclastic period was 8th century. Religious proscription occurred in many regions in the 8th and 9th centuries. You had the golden age of Byzantium, which was 9th, 10th, 11th centuries. Byzantium then fell. The Seljuks kind of took over 11th to 13th and defeated the Byzantium armies. They took over the main city of Konya, which is still there, as their capital of the Anatolian Seljuk Empire, because they're Turkic and so Muslim. The Seljuks then seized Kayseri and other Cappadocian cities and imposed, although gradually, Muslim Islam in the region. So they supplanted the Christian religion with Islam, but slowly, and they were tolerant of other religions. So they didn't just go and blast it and kill everybody. They did actually introduce their own religion alongside the others. So they were quite nice about it, shall we say, at the time. Anyway, the Seljuks up until the 13th century, and then the Seljuks were displaced by the Fourth Crusades. The armies took over Constantinople. The Ilkhahids came in, the Mongol region from Mongolia, and then you had the Ottomans coming in the 1450s. So the whole region was suffering waves of these different armies and peoples. So it's no wonder that they hid their culture in these places, and they went underground because, it's safe to come up. Oh, no, there's another lot, right? It was a busy time in the medieval period. So these places are really, really big underground and underneath, because that's where they went in times of warfare with these different marauding armies coming through, devastating their cities and capitals. So they tried to preserve what they could. As I was saying, how do people preserve their culture is a very interesting point on how we do this. This is Sinossos, cave dwellings, and this is a very beautiful little church, a Greek Orthodox church. When we think of Greek Orthodox church in the West, at least I do, I think of a big edifice, a huge Greek Orthodox church. We've got them in London, and they're always imposing buildings, aren't they? Well, this isn't. Look at the little bell tower. This is a low-key, low-profile church, and you go down into it, and these little chambers inside, it's very intimate almost. It had just recently been refurbished and painted when we visited, but very interesting. Again, low profile, keeping it away from everybody's attention. No, this isn't a church, it's just a house, forget it, pass by, keep moving, and hope they don't destroy it. So very interesting, isn't it? The different perceptions. Sinossos and that region is full of Greek architecture and Greek modulations on their buildings. So very interesting area historically. Now, we've come a bit further west on our trip here, lots of different maps. Have to come out here, I can't see it from there. So there's China, Taklamakan Basin. And look at that, Uyghur Turks are all in this region. That was their area. This is Kashgar. Mongolia's up there. Beijing's over there. And we come through the central region here. Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, all of this is in the middle region here. Now, we are in Cappadocia, which is over here. So this is quite a way from all of that. Is it east or is it west? Where are you along the route? How far west are you? How far east are you? So this is a region where, yes, they still produce, and there's lots of people everywhere that still produce silk in their way. Reeling, spinning and carding, you have to boil the cocoons, as we see here, and then they are graded into fine, medium, and raw or rough cocoons. They're not always the same grade, and then they are made into the skeins, and then they are spun into skeins like this. So this is just obviously a demonstration piece, but it's nice to see people are still doing this. And then they are dyed, of course, with natural dyes in the region. Colours are selected for the fine woven carpets, and there's a nice lady showing us how to weave. So all this is still going on, and the produce is still being used and still being sold, of course, and everybody in the region has carpets which they use as kind of decoration in the interiors. And this is in one of those cave dugout places which hosts groups of tourists like us, so that we can have a drink and a snack and sit down. So there's carpets everywhere, and they use them as decoration like we would use wallpaper, and then they just roll them up and move on and go somewhere else. So this is all very practical, and of course you see it everywhere, all different types, beautiful stuff in the bazaars and marketplaces everywhere. This is the Arastra Bazaar in Istanbul. Now, good, we're about halfway. So, I want to show you some spotlights of cultures that have been excavated in the last while. So we're focusing on regions in Afghanistan, and Mez Aynek is an extraordinary place. You may have heard of it, you might know about it. Kabul is here, it's the capital. Begram's up there. Mez is about 25 miles, 30 kilometers roughly southeast of Kabul, down here. Mez Aynek is a region that was first roughly discovered around the 1960s, and it has been, all these spots here are where they found archaeological building sites or things of interest. There's 19 different archaeological sites that are being excavated in this region. This is it's very complex, and I'm not sure how much time I've got to give you the details. Mez Aynek is an ancient site and has been excavated on and off since the 1960s. Mez Aynek means Mez is copper. It means little copper well, or little copper source. It's not little, it's huge. There is a huge copper deposit underneath. And underneath that, there is a huge bronze culture settlement that did copper mining and copper smelting underneath. It's one of the most extraordinary finds in all of the different parts of the Silk Road, and has been excavated by various peoples who have had permission to excavate. I'll just give you a quick list of what they're finding. It's over 100 acres, which is 40 hectares, well over that, in the site itself that it occupies, which they're finding. Buildings, walls, stupas. I'll just give you a quick list. 19 separate archaeological sites in the valley, excavating 2 small forts, a citadel, a surrounding wall and watchtowers, 7 fortified monasteries in multi-story, several large Buddhist stupas, a Zoroastrian fire temple, copper mining areas and smelting workshops, a mint for producing coins and artifacts in metal and glass, Buddhist and miners' habitations, paintings, murals, manuscripts relating to the Silk Road and the presence of Alexander the Great's troops in the region in the 4th century AD, CE. It is one of the richest sites for archaeological excavations. And when you see the projections of it, this is the site itself and some of the excavations that have taken place already. As I said, it's a big site, it's in a remote region. And there are Afghans, there are French, there are other peoples from time to time doing these excavation works. And there's different areas which they are excavating. So the Buddhist stupas and the Buddhist temples are numerous. This was one of the major Buddhist sites on the Silk Road, one of the roads, right? Equivalent to Dunhuang and Ajanta, China and India. This is equivalent of. So they've been doing this work, and the site itself is estimated to be 3rd to 8th century, right? Never mind the Bronze Age stuff underneath all this. So this is a projection of what they're doing. They're doing those geothermal X-raying, what do you call it? There is a word for it. Scanning systems from the air to actually make out what they've got underneath. So this is what they project the site was looking like when it was a Buddhist complex. And it's interesting because what they've highlighted is that here at the north end there is a river. There used to be a river there. Hence, you need a river to do copper mining. It takes a huge amount of water to actually extract copper from the soil, lots. So there was a ready supply of water. The monks and the mines. The monks were using the copper mine. They were making their coins. They had this huge complex of monasteries and temples and worship and trade. I mean, look at the size of it. This is extraordinary. This is the projected size of what was there. And they're probably quite accurate because they've got these scanning devices. And it's 100 acres. It's a huge site. So that alone would make it one of the primary things to put money into to excavate, right? And it would be a wonderful thing to create the stuff. And the stuff that's coming out of it, there are thousands of heads like this, Buddha heads, Buddha statues, all these kinds of things. These are in the style of Gandhara, which was ancient Pakistan in the 5th century, Buddhist image. Look at that beautiful Roman foot. I mean, the Greeks and the Romans knew how to do feet. I mean, that's a beautiful foot. And this is Gandhara style. That's prehistoric, that's Neolithic style. This is ancient style. That's Chinese style. It's gone a bit blurred down here. It shouldn't have done. That's also Gandhara style and a Roman style coin. They're excavating all kinds of stuff. They've got nowhere to put it. They're packing it. They've got no time to catalogue it. It's the most extraordinary thing. Now, one of the problems is, it's sitting on top of a copper mine, which is worth, they reckon there are 5.5 metric tons of copper ore underneath. That's worth a lot. The Chinese proposed to mine it for them, for the Afghans. You know why, don't you? The Chinese actually need copper like we need oil, like we need air, and they use up half the world's supply of copper, mainly from Africa, as you probably well know, and Australia. So the Chinese have got their eye on it, and in 2007 they made an offer to pay the Afghan government $30 billion to have the right to mine this site. And they gave them from 2009 to 2012 to get all the stuff out, to do their archaeological work before they started plundering the earth to get at the copper. Well, it wasn't so easy. There were huge problems with the site. So they wanted a 30-year lease to do the mining. Of course, the Kabul government said, yes, please, because the Kabul government is broke. They already owe $7 billion. They need the money. They also need the work, they need the labor, and they need to become economically stronger and independent. So, $30 billion is a hard offer to refuse. So they said yes. Right, there's all kinds of problems with this. And as of 2012, which was the cut-off point for the excavations, it didn't happen. There are problems in that there's no water. That river dried up a long time ago. Where do you get the water from? The Chinese would also have to build a railway to get the copper ore out, never mind how they actually get it out and smelt it. And there are other problems. Philippe Marquis, the director of the Délégation Archéologique Française en Afghanistan, who is one of the overseers of the excavations, said, if Mez Aynak is not destroyed by mining, it will be destroyed by looting. I mean, there is so much stuff there. They can't possibly police the whole site. It's too much. They do have soldiers policing it, but you can't possibly police everything. And one Buddhist statue can reach $10,000 on the antique open market. It's tempting. You know, it's like the looting of the Egyptian tombs, the Chinese tombs of Dunhuang. You know, you can't blame people for going in there and lifting the stuff. The other problems are, and this isn't the whole story, the other problems are China's economy is slowing down for the moment. The other problems are the Taliban, the Al-Qaeda use this area as a training ground. It's full of landmines and explosives. So you have to clear the landmines before you can do the mining. And the other thing was the Taliban started firing rockets at the Chinese delegation when they arrived there, so they didn't like that either. So they're kind of, okay, let's step back for a minute, shall we? Let's just revise this whole situation. So this is complex. It's an extraordinary site. As far as I know, they're still trying to get the stuff out of the site so that they can actually excavate it. Some wonderful faces of the real people there and the faces they're finding in amongst everything else. And so this is the Chinese threat to the priceless Buddhas, but it's not quite happening yet. And one of the articles said, well, from what's going on, the mining actually won't take place at least until 2018, which was, of course, last year. So, you know, they're probably still in a state of waiting. Meanwhile, they are running to try and save as much of this stuff as possible. It's a complex situation, and this chap, Saving Mez Aynak, is a documentary. You can look it up on Google by Brent E. Huffman in 2014. Worth having a look at. Very interesting site, especially for all the extraordinary visuals they've been finding. Right, I'm spotlighting a few things now. Right, so this is also in Afghanistan, north of Kabul, Begram. Begram site was first discovered in about the 1850s by an English explorer who was following the trail of Alexander in the region, Alexander the Great in the region, and he was interested in coins, and he found the Begram site and actually found lots and lots of coins and was excavating those. 1830s. Charles Masson, his name was, the first English explorer who came across the Begram site. It may have been known before that. Begram site is not a tomb, it's a palace site, probably for a merchant. And it was a license was granted by the Kabul government to excavate the site in 1937 and 1939. So this is the findings from those two excavations here. So this, come back. Right, so this is the site here that we're looking at, which is this bit here. Right, so this is a palace. Probably not a king's palace, but a palace, a very large residence for a very, very wealthy merchant. Right, so they've excavated this bit here, a new royal city. There's the actual site there. Kabul is further south, and it's this bit here, which you can see on the map. So there are two particular rooms within the central palace area, they call it a palace, which have been excavated, rooms 10 and 13. And what they found was absolutely fascinating. They found groupings of trade items from the 1st century and 2nd centuries AD. You know, this is going right back to the beginning of the Silk Road traders, not the beginning, but very, very early. So they found groupings, as you can see on the left-hand side here, of bronze pottery, ivory plaques and stools, drinking cups, ceramic lamps, some items of furniture. There's some glass drinking goblets up here. Look at all these bronze pots and grouped together in a very organized way. And in room 13, there are other groupings of items as well, which they found and catalogued. So this is very interesting. Look at these ivory carvings from their saying 1st century AD, roundabout. Now, they look somewhat familiar in style. There's some more. Underneath a gateway, ivory plaques underneath a gateway. Look at the beautiful women, the voluptuous women. It might remind you of this. Sanchi, gate. Look at the gateway. Isn't it rather close? They're not saying it's a direct copy in comparison, but to my mind, this is very, very, very closely related. And the ladies underneath, the voluptuous ladies, that style of dancer, or nymph as we might call them, is found in the paintings on the walls in Ajanta, and it's found here in the upper registers around the gateways in Sanchi. As you know, Sanchi is 232 BC, the earliest stupa. And look at this wonderful ivory bracket from Begram with this lady. And this is what I mean about the voluptuous ladies. They're in exactly the same style. So isn't that interesting? We don't know who made them, but they're in this collection. You've got bronze pots, the whole collection of pots and bronze vases with heads in them like this. Athena on the right and another woman's head on the left. A lovely glass goblet and a glass rhyton, a drinking horn, and a beautiful glass bowl, looking a bit like Murano glass, doesn't it? Striated with colours. And this wonderful glass goblet, faceted rather like the glass bowl we saw yesterday that came from Central Persia and ended up in Japan in the Shozoin collection. So these items, this is the central region, and they are getting in these ideas from all over the place. So all right, that's some of the tiny hoard from Begram, so tiny, showing us. I mean, there's a lot more we could look at. Tilia Tepe is another site. Tepe means hill, a bit like this one in the middle. This is northern Afghanistan, which they also call Bactria, like the Bactrian camels with the double humps. Yeah, so we're looking at this very bleak region here. Now, Tilia Tepe and it was a site that was unearthed which showed up to 6 tombs, burial chambers of nomads in the region. And the nomads didn't have objects, but they had clothing, and they had the most extraordinary quality gold workmanship, small items. So this is quite different to the Begram hoard or treasures, because that was a merchant, and that was quite different stuff. These are personal ornaments and items from these 6 chambers found inside an ancient hill, which was on the site of a much older place underneath, burial ground. So this really caught my attention for several reasons. This is a sword sheath here, but the swastikas are Buddhist swastikas. You find them in Hinduism and you find them in Buddhist temples in the Far East. It's not the Nazi one, obviously, it's far older than that. It's the Buddhist and Hindu swastika. The gold workmanship is extraordinary, inlaid with, as you can see, turquoise and other stones. The central one is a sheath from a sword in a tomb in Paekche, which is southwestern Korea, on the Korean peninsula, and they worked their gold in a similar fashion. The last one over here is a scabbard with Bactrian camels on it, inlaid with agate and turquoise. You can see the Bactrians, the double humps camels. The most exquisite work. The nomads had a crown like this, made up of sections, and these hanging, what do you call them? Ornaments that were placed on them so that they tinkled and moved when they moved. 1st century, they reckon. The same style is found in tombs in Korea. This is Shilla, gold crown. Korea had three empires, Shilla, Paekche, and Goryeo in the north, Shilla to the east, Paekche to the west. And in the tombs, and they have a tomb culture in Korea, they have such similar artifacts. I was thinking, whoa, where did these come from? Who came first? Where did these get? Right, this is meant to be 5th century. So those nomads had these ideas and had these beautiful items. These two are from Shilla and Paekche, 5th century in Korea, right? Korean tombs of emperors. And if we look at this is the collapsible gold crown for portable nomads with a band, and then you could take out those finials, pack them away flat, and then a bit like we would call IKEA flat pack, and then assemble it to wear, right? Great idea. But the crown here from Paekche is exactly the same. It's the same design, it's the same style. It's very, very close. How is that? And this is a cap with also these hanging finials, and finials on the top, and these hanging bits in small rings around it, made of gold. This is gilt bronze, but of course the gilt has gone by now, but it's a very, very similar design. And some of the pendants, this beautiful pendant on the left as we're looking at it, with two dragons inlaid with, looks like agates, might even be rubies, and of course ubiquitous turquoise, beautifully done. And the one on the left, right, Lolang Buttle. Lolang was a Han commandery, 200 BC, 200 AD, in the eastern side of China, bordering northern Korea. And they had beautiful gold workmanship. There are 7 dragons in this buckle with turquoise inlays. Very similar to this. Not the same, but similar. That intricacy of work. And look at this, a gold clasp with Dionysus and Ariadne riding a line with an angel, Romanesque, Greek, Greco-Roman design, and a buckle with a dragon cart, looking distinctly, to my mind, Chinese. He's got a high collar and wide sleeves. This chap looks distinctly Chinese to me with this dragon cart. And these are two, actually, buckles facing each other with this one, two buckles. So these are personal ornaments, and all these gold items went onto the clothing which these nomads wore. They were exquisitely made, and the workmanship is extraordinary, and they reckon that the workmanship must have come from the same gold workshop somewhere, they don't know where. And this winged Venus was also found. They're calling her the Aphrodite of Bactria. Isn't that lovely? She's a most beautiful object with hand on hip. There's a certain attitude, isn't there, with this one? She's kind of looking at you. And it's the most beautiful object. Now, the point about these last two from Begram site and Tilia Tepe site is that these items were in the Kabul Museum. And because of the looting and difficulties that took place in Kabul and Afghanistan in the 1970s and 80s, they packed them all up for safekeeping and put them away somewhere else. In 1989, the director of the museum thought, this is too good, we can't lose this. They packed them all up and shipped them out for good storage. They then reopened them in about 2003, 2004 to check they had not been tampered with, which they had not. And there was an exhibition in London shortly after that where they showed some of these items, and these come from the catalogue from that exhibition. They've then been packed up again for safekeeping. Now, you know, you've read in the papers that the Museum of Kabul was ransacked and wrecked by ISIS, by the Taliban, because anything pre-Islamic does not exist or should not exist in their mind, so they seek to destroy things. We know they destroyed the Bamiyan Buddhas, etc., etc.